Hello there, and welcome to McKinsey Live. I'm Lucia Rahilly, McKinsey's editorial director, and your host for today's event, Purpose versus PR, How Business Can Find Meaning in the COVID-19 Era. In this McKinsey Live series, our goal is to give you the opportunity to engage on our latest research, and obviously asking questions is a big part of enriching our time together. So please feel free to ask questions at any point using the Q&A bar at the bottom of your live stream. We've got just 30 minutes together, which is quick, but we will do our best to share a selection of these questions as we go. For many business leaders, the events of 2020 have brought the notion of organizational purpose urgently to the foreground. But what remains more nebulous is how leaders should act on their desire for purpose, how they can infuse purpose throughout their organization in ways that meaningfully affect behavior and performance. Joining us today to train a spotlight on these issues are two senior partners, Dame Vivian Hunt and Bruce Simpson. Vivian is a leading thinker on stakeholder capitalism, and for years served as managing partner of our UK and Ireland offices. She's also led McKinsey's pharmaceuticals and medical products practice in our Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. Vivian, welcome, and thanks for being here with us today. Bruce is also a veteran leader, and in fact, can claim the second longest tenure of any of McKinsey's partners. Bruce started McKinsey's operations practice. He's been managing partner of our Canada office, and he currently leads our client work on purpose and ESG. Bruce, welcome, and grateful for your time today.
Thank you.
Vivian, Bruce, let's start by defining terms. What do we mean when we talk about purpose? What is it, and why has it become so prevalent in the business lexicon today? Bruce, would you kick us off with that one?
Yes, CEOs tell us that they're spending 50% of their time on that very question today. It's hugely important. The purpose is a company's core reason for being. It answers that tough question, what would the world lose if your company actually disappeared? If could another bank, for example, just take over what your bank happens to do? Same in consumer goods. And companies always had a purpose when they were started. So asking the question, what was our purpose at inception is a great question for a company to reflect on. Now, so purpose is that core reason for being. It tends to anchor then ESG priorities, which are measurable. And so when a company is developing its purpose, it uses ESG terms to describe it, and then it uses ESG language to measure it. And that's how purpose and ESG work together. And now purpose there's several reasons why it's becoming important today. Companies like Unilever share that their organic purpose-built products are growing up to 30% more than other products. Companies that are focusing on the environment are finding great ways to lower costs, as well as making a transition to a 1.5 degree world. In fact, de-risking that transition enables them to solve for a huge amount of EBIT that's at stake if they get it wrong. We have some new McKinsey research too, which shows that employees who feel purpose at work, meaning that it's really built into frontline decision making, are up to 4 times more engaged, leading to higher loyalty, lower attrition. And there's also some very good research behind companies that are leaders on ESG and purpose have a lower cost of capital. So many reasons for focusing on it.
I think that shift has accelerated, Bruce, over the past few years. And, 2020 is certainly a seminal moment, but it is reflective of the broader trend that the data and references we are using to anchor our discussions with companies and clients really illustrate. In many ways, we're at a tipping point, I think, in 2020, but it is definitely a long-term trend where the expectations of what businesses are doing as their core business purpose, what their shareholders and other stakeholders need really are combined. And companies are trying to make that more explicit.
Definitely.
Recent research just illustrates the point. 92% of people say that they want corporations and companies that promote an economy that serves all Americans, or in this case of domestic research, many European and indeed Asian companies have long heritages of social purpose and employee purpose built into their fabric. But interestingly, only 50% of those employees also believe that they're currently delivering against that goal. And that's a pretty significant gap just within your employee base. 70% of employees consider it important as a reason for their choice of an employer, motivation at work, and their stance if they are deciding to stay in a current job. 44%, so that's almost half of Fortune 500 CEOs, state that this is an explicit part of the problems that they should be solving, aligned with their capabilities and needs. And of course, sometimes employees and customers vote with their feet. They choose what not to do. And we find that 38% of consumers will boycott or not use products and services that they believe mismatch with those values. Up to half of those people, 17%, don't ever return to the brand. And then, of course, finally, linking it to shareholder returns with a significant amount of AUM related to concrete ESG goals that are measurable and linked back directly to environmental, social, and governance. So there's no question that it's really concrete and really real for not only companies and leadership, but also many of their stakeholders.
Interesting. So Vivian, purpose was already part of the calculus pre-pandemic, but you did describe 2020 as a seminal moment. What more has changed since the crisis has begun?
Well, the pandemic and the reaction to that from business has had multiple vectors. First and foremost, of course, the health pandemic and crisis, the economic crisis and its impact on the structure and nature of jobs and particularly vulnerable jobs and vulnerable people. The climate change impact, sometimes showing how much progress we can make if we really change behaviors and assumptions, other times showing how much damage is still being done. And of course, elements of social justice and behavior, including, for example, inclusion in the workplace. So all of these things came to bear simultaneously. And the public statements that many companies are making, the Business Roundtable, the Canadian pension funds, the CBI here in the UK, many examples in Asia and Middle East, are really illustrating companies committing in public, some of them for the first time. 1/3 of companies believe they've been working on issues around ESG systematically over time. But I would say the other 2/3, over 90%, have now made concrete statements. And I think everyone, executives, boards, employees, customers, we're all looking forward to thinking about how you can go from theory to action and really begin to embed it into a company's DNA. That is no less true for any company or any actor in the space. And it's, I think for us, the issue is how do you shift from the theory, making a commitment, to actually putting those things into process and into action in your incentives, your mindsets, your policies, making it real in a company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe Bruce, do you want to take a moment to talk about how some companies are trying to make it more concrete?
Yes, well, it's all about shifting from a purpose statement, which most companies have, to a credible purpose narrative, which includes the statement and commitments, stop-dos, and full embedding into the organization. It starts, though, with an exploratory phase for companies to understand their heritage. What made that company great, perhaps years before? What do stakeholders feel? What do employees feel? What makes a company most exciting? So exploring one's world, having a very cold, objective view to it, the company status. Where is it vulnerable? is a key question. What are the dimensions on which its performance is weak, and getting inputs from stakeholders on that is very important. Then defining their contribution. What is that unique, we call it a superpower, where the company's strengths intersect with societal needs, and that's what they then need to build into their products and services. Fully embedding that in the business, and that means in its decisions internally, on its decisions externally, its products and services, and then finally publicly committing to where the company is going. Very important to have that public commitment out there. That helps in its authenticity. But if you start talking about your purpose narrative externally before you have embedded it into what you do, you're going to be criticized very heavily for that, quite rightly, because that test of authenticity is high, and it's not authentic until it really is part of the corporate DNA.
Thanks, Bruce. So let's get a bit more granular now. This is a helpful overview, but let's get a bit more granular about how we move from setting up a narrative and talking about purpose to actually embedding it throughout an organization. Vivian, would you take us forward on that?
Well, what I can tell you is it's not easy, because it requires you to be really concrete and tailored to your company's purpose, strategic position, its superpower, and also how that impacts your stakeholders. And what we'll do in the next few minutes is hopefully have a discussion about some companies and just concrete examples of companies of different size and scales and different aspects who are using concrete steps around portfolio strategy, people and culture, and other really specific ways that they're building it in. It is a journey. It takes 2 or 3 years probably to embed it properly into the operations of a company, and it's not easy. It's a journey that we've been on as well as McKinsey. We've had claims and challenges around our firm that we've taken very seriously recently, and it's made us be more explicit even in 2020 about our purpose around client impact and serving society in a positive way, to not assume that, but to make it an explicit piece of how we work and operate. It's impacted how we've set about using some of our processes, most explicitly our client selection criteria and process, and of course training, and just really ensuring that our hopes and expectations and our values and our actions match. So it's an iterative process and a long-term one for many companies. But the best way to illustrate any of these things is, of course, with examples. And maybe, Bruce, we can get started on portfolio strategy and choices that companies make.
Yes, they're great examples. If we move to the next page, on the portfolio side, one of the most important things for companies to be credible is to stop doing something. In fact, a list of stop do's is a crucial indicator of authenticity. And if a company isn't stopping something, it probably has not gone deep enough on really embedding purpose into what they do. Great example of this actually is DSM, Netherlands-based Dutch state mines. They were a very large European-based bulk chemicals company, but they went through their own purpose journey, which then led to a very strong focus on the triple bottom line, which people, planet, and profit. And they adopted a radically different course to what they had been on previously, which lasted a good 10 to 12 years. They divested businesses such as petrochemicals and ammonia. They also bought, I think, 25 or so new businesses, which included food, feed products, nutrition. And they've transformed themselves into a very, very innovative specialty chemicals producer. So those stop do's are very important. Vivian, what would you add to that on portfolio strategy and products?
Well, to take a really current example around technology platforms, Apple or Alphabet would be one around their freedom and focus mission that they have around the experience that they want their users to have. But that means, with freedom and providing more focus and personalization for users comes responsibility. And so they're constantly, of course, being challenged, but also looking at ways that you can edit, improve, and strengthen how they deliver that mission through their products and services. And I think really clear example of that is their decision to not offer personal loans, for example, payday loans with extortionate and very high interest rates, and those that are not conducive to responsible consumer behavior. There's always judgments behind these things because of one person's inappropriate payday loan is another person's flexible financial service product. But be that as it may, when you're offering the platform, you've got to make a judgment about how it is aligned with your mission. And so that's led them to restrict some advertisement, not just by some obvious areas around legal responsibility and or age, but also in terms of what's appropriate and what behavior are you really encouraging. Toy companies are another example that have changed product lines and updated them, for example, around body image, or adding to their current popular product lines body images that are more realistic, more aligned with how boys and girls, men and women see themselves, and seen a lot of growth and resonance with different groups. And of course, responsible structures and alignment around, financial products and services are great examples. So my point is, it doesn't have to be something that is regulatory driven. In the case of tech companies or consumer goods companies, they're making decisions based on their alignment about what products and services to offer. In other cases, regulators, at the boundary of new practice, may decide what and how companies operate. But at its core, if it's more aligned with what your stakeholders are doing and aligned with your purpose and your superpower, oftentimes companies find that there's also real growth and that these things are not in tension or in contradiction with each other. So when you get sort of charged with purpose washing or not really being serious or window dressing around purpose, you can back it up with the needs you're meeting of your consumers, responsible choices you've made around, for example, advertising or pricing, and really put evidence to the fact that your core offer, your products and services, what you're promising your customers is consistent with your purpose.
If we move on then to people and culture, it's very important to understand that there is a rational journey to purpose, which includes commitments, KPIs, metrics. But there's also an emotional journey to understand what's exciting to your people. How do you put people at the heart of your business to get that 4X engagement that I mentioned earlier on? Great example of this is the Best Buy transformation led by Hubert Joly, who was a CEO for many years. And he put people into the heart of business, as he describes it, focusing very, very much on the employees in the stores. And as he says it, you focus on the employees take care of customers, that takes care of business. And the business objectives, the output, which was actually 8 times shareholder value appreciation, it was an output, but it wasn't a primary objective, but that did result from their transformation. Now, those employees in the stores, they had the ability to give on-the-spot employee discounts to employees, but also to give discounts to customers without asking for approval. He developed a Geek Squad. The Geek Squad were techies that would visit customers at their homes and advise them on what products to buy, and then provide those products, install them. So, full service delivery, which was also terrific. And he just really, really focused on the employee, building up the employee and helping them make decisions, drove their purpose journey. So the people and culture side is a big deal. Let's move on to processes and systems. Vivian.
Well, anything that you want to be real in a company or in a culture has to be anchored in what you do. And those are your processes and your systems. And when you see those change in a company, it's a little bit like changing the backbone or the fabric or the pathways, if you will, on a technological platform. The example of BHP Billiton is a good one, where they decided that they couldn't really have impact on their own processes and outcomes unless they were able to impact the total system, sort of all of the companies and partners that were working with them throughout their supply chain. And so their CEO, Mike Henry, described it as embedding purpose and shared goals throughout the supply chain. And that includes everything from their objectives around on time, in full, and efficiency around their mines, responsible sourcing and aligned environmental goals, and making sure that they were training not only their suppliers, but also the suppliers' suppliers. This year, when we all experienced this real pressures around the COVID crisis and interruptions in supply chains and just a crisis for the world, and of course then for businesses, they decided to make changes around payment terms, reducing their standard 30 or 60-day payment terms down to 7 days to make sure that their suppliers, but equally important, the smaller community-based suppliers that would be tighter on cash, tighter on supply management, would be able to get through that. And they did find that, taking their terms from say 30 days down to 7 days, just increasing the cash flow using BHP's balance sheet to help strengthen and support the supply chain during the COVID crisis was needed and hugely appreciated by their suppliers.
Why don't you move us on, Vivian, to performance metrics, another dimension that's super important?
Well, I think it's an old axiom that, what gets measured gets managed, and you certainly can't track what you don't measure. The other reality is that technology, which is probably the biggest change impacting our world and certainly business, allows us to see and use data in really, really powerful and positive ways. And so quantified metrics that link to the changes that you want to make in your business choices, culture and performance, and of course processes are really important. It's a concrete way of making it real and set stretch targets for companies. And as I mentioned earlier, many companies are stating that purpose is important, but there's a gap between what employees and often customers believe they're actually doing, and setting concrete metrics are a really good way of aligning everyone around what you want to achieve and making sure that it's feasible in the business. Brazil-based Natura uses 3 different P&Ls, one around, of course, your traditional P&L management, one entirely around the environmental impact, so the E, inputs and outputs and cost to measure and manage. And then, of course, they do one around their community impact, including things around waste and crop efficiency. So when you look at the metrics, are quite technical, very tailored to their business. They believe it gives them a source of competitive advantage, but I can promise you they are concrete and very measurable. Others, like Shell, have linked their goals around net carbon zero over a 5-year period already to the compensation of their top 150 executives, and their hope is to link it to the compensation of every employee. And when you link something to pay, it's real.
Mm-hmm. And Vivian, continue then on positions and engagement. I think what companies stand for, particularly in their governance, is a very big deal here too.
It is, and you mentioned the point about some of the changes are concrete changes, say around product portfolio or capital allocation. Others are around cultural changes. Both of those can be measured, but it also has to be reflected in what you commit to publicly, as you stressed at the beginning of our discussion. And certainly one of the most visible ways to do that is to ensure that your policy positions, your external commitments, and your partnerships reflect and are aligned with that same purpose. And so tailoring those to fit the changes that you've made within your business and how you're going to communicate that is probably the most visible way that your employees, customers, and supply chain at minimum can see that. It also drives accountability, Bruce. I mean, once you've said it publicly, every company in the world and every person on this live broadcast knows that once you've made the commitment publicly, the likelihood that you're going to stick to it, of course, goes up. I also think it reinforces confidence from your employees who feel additional commitments when you do things that are concrete and real, and you celebrate those publicly. That can be something as simple as, relief days and extra time that some employees have done, given the massive complexity personally and professionally we're all experiencing during this COVID year, or adjustments in opening hours tailored to different customer needs. They can be large policy statements or they can be small actions, but when they're publicly made and clear, there's just a huge amount of confidence that we as people as well as the companies are really going to deliver against those.
Exactly, and I think on this position, taking a position externally, has actually caught many companies out recently. There are companies, for example, who would make positive statements in support of social causes, but then at the same time, they would be increasing CEO compensation, or they would be doing share buybacks, and they would be laying people off. And that inconsistency in some of the governance decisions that companies have been making have caught many of them out. They need to be consistent. Layoffs, many companies have had to go through quite significant restructuring over the last while, but it's significant. Let me give you two examples. Danone in Europe has gone through major restructuring without laying anybody off. They made a commitment to retrain those employees. Microsoft in North America closing all of its bricks and mortar stores, but they've committed that they will keep all of those employees and retrain them to build some skills in for future roles. So this consistency, do employees really count? Does purpose really count? Is a very big deal. And I would summarize it in saying it's a shift from brands to stands. What companies are really standing for depends on what they're actually doing versus what they're just saying.
And I would say also, Bruce, that if you can't square the circle, if you can't figure out a way to have your employee commitment, a wage level, consistent with some difficult decisions that businesses need to make in difficult economic times, that's the time to problem solve with a broader range of stakeholders, look for analogies in other industries, do scenarios of what if we, for example, in the case of Microsoft stores or Amazon's retraining people out of distribution jobs, how do we do this and still be able to fund it responsibly? And engaging stakeholders is a terrific way to begin to think about how we make those trade-offs, because very often stakeholders will work with you to be able to make sure that the business continues in a healthy way. And so that's always a good time, I think, to engage with stakeholders and look for analogies of what others have done. Danone's a terrific example. I think it's one of the largest B Corps in the world and very committed to ESG over multiple decades, but it's facing some of the same difficult decisions that any business is in this period. But it's found a way to not trade off purpose while still making economically and operationally responsible decisions. So great examples.
It's a great point. PayPal, another great company in North America, and their purpose journey, they looked at the fragility of the economics of their frontline employees and focused on increasing frontline pay, which, as the CEO describes it, then unlocks a little bit more discretionary income for their own employees, which is much more important for them than doing something externally. A great sign of authenticity.
Bruce and Vivian, this has been such a fantastic discussion. We are unfortunately at time, but we've had so many interesting questions coming through the feed, sometimes on similar themes. I think what we may do is take 2 or 3 of these, answer them in text, and publish them with the replay of this session. So please visit us and look to see if your question has been answered there. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks to everyone in our McKinsey Live audience today. Before you go, I do want to call your attention to the Q&R code you can see right now on screen. If you hold your mobile phone camera right over that code, you can register instantaneously for our final McKinsey Live of 2020, which will be our capstone event featuring McKinsey's global managing partner, Kevin Sneeder. It's scheduled to take place next Wednesday, December 9th. Kevin's going to be talking about what we've learned during this strange and destabilizing COVID year, and vitally, what we can look forward to in the year to come. And specifically, he's going to talk through 8 forces that will be critical in reshaping the future of business, both in 2021 and beyond. So again, hold your phone over that QR code to register, or if you prefer and you're less intrepid, as I may be, simply visit us at mckinsey.com to reserve your spot. See you there. Have a great day or evening, and stay well.